Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate, and we're looking at a splintering of the left. People who vote left in France come next May's presidential election. They're going to have the alternative between the Socialists and their allies who are in the midst of a primary race. It was round one on Sunday, with the left attacking Benoit Hamon, the former education minister, ahead of former Prime Minister Manuel Valls, who is more social democrat in his views. With us to talk about Laurent Slimani. She is a spokesperson for Benoit Hamon's campaign, also a municipal councillor in the French city of Rouen. Elisabeth Humbert-Dorfmüller, who supported Manuel Valls and who is a member of both the French Socialist Party and the German SPD Party. And we'll be talking about Europe's left as a whole a little bit more in a moment. Nicholas Vineker, who's been covering this campaign and will be all the way through to May for Politico.eu, and from Houston, Texas, historian Robert Zaretsky at the University of Texas. There was an image on Sunday while people were voting. The outgoing president who decided not to run, he's a socialist, François Hollande, in a desert all his own, literally. François Hollande in Chile, in Acatama, part of a tour of Latin America. Robert Zaretsky, a lot of people are blaming François Hollande for the downfall of the Socialist Party, but is he the only culprit in the fact that the Socialists have fallen so low?
I think he's in part responsible. I don't think he's fully responsible. I think to a degree he was responsible at the very beginning of his 5-year term of office in cultivating a certain program that was easily identified and signed on to by the traditional left within the Socialist Party. When he attempted to make that pivot towards looser workplace rules and to liberalizing the economy, very moderately, at least from an American perspective, that pivot was as catastrophic for Hollande as it was for Mitterrand, and in fact, as it was for Léon Blum in the 1930s. And he never quite recovered from it. So I do think he's partly responsible in maintaining certain illusions on the French left about the possibility of pursuing traditional policies embraced by the left in the face of 21st century challenges.
All right, well, it may be cold comfort for the outgoing president, but he's not alone. Social Democrats, the center-left in Europe, has fallen to its lowest share of the vote in 7 decades. The Economist a few months back showing this graph where if you base it, if 100 was the share of the vote in Europe for the center-left in 1970, this is how much it's fallen dramatically. Well, basically, since the financial crisis, it seems, Elisabeth Humbert-Dorfmüller, that the center-left, be it in France or Germany, didn't have the answer for voters when it comes to globalization and the backlash.
It didn't. Apparently it didn't. In France, the voting system made that the left could win the elections, and François Hollande came out as a president. In Germany, you have this proportional voting mainly, and so SPD had to coalesce with the Christian Democrats. And that in itself was, according to me, already a mistake. Mm-hmm. So the answer to the financial crisis from the German Social Democrats' point of view was we have to ally with the other part in order to maintain stability. But by doing that, they were unable to produce a new model. So for the people who are voting, it was easier to vote for Merkel than to vote for the two candidates she confronted within the SPD, and they both. But
their grand coalition agreement did get a few things. Most notably, we think a minimum wage, for instance, which didn't exist up to then in Germany. But what you're saying is that.
It's regarded as measures. It's not regarded as something which the Social Democratic Party has obtained. It's globally the voter thinks that it comes from the government, and the government is Merkel.
So wait, we're going into an election year now, and
yes.
It's going to be in September.
Yes, in September.
In Germany.
Yes.
Should they be doing the same thing as in France, saying, let's go left?
Well, they're not going to. I'm telling you right away.
Should they, though?
They could. It could be a solution. I'm not sure it would work, but it could be a solution. What I think should happen is that the SPD should reach out the hand to the two other left parties, which are the Green Party and Die Linke, which is comparable to Mélenchon, and try to form an alternative to this grand coalition. For the moment, they're not even trying to. So this is not enough for me, and I think the SPD is going into serious difficulties if it thinks that the grand coalition is the only solution. And for the moment, that's what happens, because in the polls they have only 21%, which is even worse than the last results. So if they're not doing a serious attempt to build an alternative, it's going to get worse and worse.
The idea is that the difficulty is to think differently. We saw with the election in the United States, people said, "Oh, Donald Trump will never win. He's doing things the wrong way. This is untested." When it comes to the left in Europe, do they have to rethink the way they do politics?
I think, on an individual basis, politicians are going to look to Donald Trump and learn a lot of lessons, namely that, when you go on the attack, that is what tends to remain in people's minds, and that sort of negative way of doing politics has definitely come to France, and you can see especially the far-right National Front Party putting that into effect, I think doing great damage to its adversaries. In terms of the themes and the type of policies that we're seeing pushed through, I agree with the dichotomy between pro-globalization candidates and anti-globalization candidates. And I think that's the way the cookie is crumbling here too in France, and perhaps also to a degree in Germany. We have, in France, there'll be two candidates on the hard left. One of them is clearly anti-European, and one of them, Jean-Luc Mélenchon, and the other one is kind of moderate. Although I don't know Benoit Hamon's positions very well on Europe. I suspect that he's not a sort of unadulterated fan of the European Union, but at least he's not overtly anti-European.
I'll put the question to you, Laurent Simony, but I'll put it in a different way. What about Donald Trump on his first business day in office, taking the axe to a Trans-Pacific Partnership deal, hinting that he may do the same, or he'll at least try to fight for an altering of the North American Free Trade Agreement? Would a President Hamon be considering the same kind of thing, review trade deals that maybe create global imbalances?
Well, I mean, first of all, the one decision that I want to also point out is the fact that he will basically cut any support to NGOs supporting abortion abroad, which I think is a very, very important and dramatic decision that he's made, and which is also what we are preparing ourselves for in France if we don't react. So just on this point,
does Benoit Hamon think that you have to protect Europe's borders?
What Benoit Hamon thinks is that, it depends on what you put in globalization. And in Europe, we have a high level of public services, high level of social standards, high level of environmental standards. And yes, we need to protect these from the social dumping that results from, undetermined free trade agreements like we're doing them. I mean, I'm not against trade at all. And this is where I kind of disagree. I mean, I understand what you mean on the globalization, anti-globalization cleavage, but I'm not quite sure that's exactly it. But, the question we have to ask ourselves is, what kind of trade? Do we want a trade that is only based on the free trade of the free movement of goods and capitals, or do we want trade that is also based on values such as protection of the environment, such as protection of social standards, such as improving the well-being of citizens? I think, as a left-wing person and as a progressive person, this is the objective I'm putting myself. And if that means sometimes putting some barriers, then let's do it.
And how about the free movement of people? Because, of course, in Britain, that's a red line that's been drawn. It's much more limited.
Well, but if you look at even in Europe and especially in the world, I mean, we're dropping barriers for goods, capitals, and finance, but we're not doing it. We're doing the opposite for people. So what does that tell of the kind of world we're building? I would like it to be reversed, or at least I would like the people to have as much freedom as we give to finance and goods at the moment.
All right. On Saturday, on the eve of that first round of the French primaries of the left here in this country, in the German Rhine Valley city of Koblenz, the main leaders of Europe's populist and far-right parties gathered for what they called a Countersummit, bringing together the leaders of France's National Front, Italy's Northern League, Germany's Alternative für Deutschland, and the Dutch Freedom Party.
The people are fed up with more open borders, and I hope there will be no more terroristic attacks, but I'm afraid there will be many more. We haven't seen anything yet. If you see what is happening with the mass immigration and the denial of the problem of Islamization by the political correct elite.
It's not just the far right that's mentioning terrorism a lot in their discourse. We heard Theresa May last week mention it in her big Brexit speech, Nicholas Vinegar, and you were talking about going on the attack. It seems to be a vote getter.
Absolutely. I think it's kind of the wild card. It's the one thing everybody's afraid of, and it's the kind of bludgeoning argument against open borders and free trade and any kind of sort of liberal worldview, in fact. I'd just like to point out
but
that...
you keep putting like free trade and freedom of movement as if it's the same thing. I'm sorry, but like, you know, let's also look at the facts. Like, there is free trade. There is no freedom of movement for people who are leaving from Syria at the moment and are not being welcomed in Europe. So I think we shouldn't confuse both debates, because, no, I'm sorry, but it's not the same thing to be against a certain type of free trade and to be like Geert Wilders just was against people coming to your country.
We're talking about the people at the summit, and it turns out that these people are against free trade and they're also against
Yes, that doesn't mean that because you're against free trade, you're like these people. Well, I'm kind of hearing this from what you're saying just now.
Well, in any case, I'd just like to finish on the summit. One thing I think that we should point out about the so-called far-right summit is how divided all these parties are on many important issues, such as the attitude toward Russia. Geert Wilders does not feel the same way that Marine Le Pen does. Their views on the economy, the AFD is a liberally economic party, while Marine Le Pen is a statist socialist party, and they're presenting themselves as some kind of unified bloc. I think we should question that.
When you hear Geert Wilders talk about the denial of the problem of Islamization by our political leaders, what's the answer for a candidate running against him? Because the Dutch have an election coming up in March.
Absolutely. What's the answer to that? Mm-hmm. It's difficult. I mean, the Dutch populism has been strong since the 90s. I don't know if you remember the assassination of Theo van Gogh, which had made a big, huge stir in the country. And since then, this anti-Muslim movement has been, not Islamism, anti-Muslim movement has been growing. In Germany, it has been, of course, reinforced by the migration wave of the last year. Unfortunately, I'm a little bit pessimistic there. I don't think they're going to shrink again. The situation is such that probably they're going to get more and more. I'm not saying that's going to be the majority of Europe soon. I'm not saying that, but I don't think I think they're here for some time. We will have to deal with them for some time.
Robert Zareski, there's definitely an isolationist wind blowing through the United States right now. What's your reaction to the way all these races are unfolding in France, in the Netherlands, in Germany?
Well, what strikes me is, for example, take this past weekend's meeting of the far-right groups in Koblenz. There's a historical irony that not very many people have noted. Koblenz was the capital of the counter-revolutionaries from France, beginning in 1792. The aristocrats, the clergy, went into exile in Koblenz and began conspiring against the revolution. And there, of course, they were joined by Austria, by a number of the German states. And that was the place where a number of coalitions were pieced together in order to challenge the revolution unsuccessfully, as Nicholas pointed out correctly. Much more divides the parties that met at Koblenz than unites them. And I don't know if they're going to be able to bridge those significant divisions. As far as the isolationist wind, I do feel it in Texas. It's as strong here as it is, I suspect, in Paris. It's much warmer. It's 72 degrees right now. I suspect that's not the case where all of you are.
I can confirm that.
Great. But it's no more pleasant. I can guarantee you that. And only the future will tell. For the moment, Donald Trump, and he is being cited chapter and verse by, for example, Marine Le Pen. She has not quit quoting him, citing him as an inspiration, as a possible future for the FN. If Trump could do it, why not Le Pen and the FN? It's quite remarkable, but not surprising. I don't know. I think much has to do with, and I know this harkens to the great man theory of history, which is very much out of fashion amongst my colleagues. But I think it will play a role in the next year or two. Namely, what will the individuals who do assume power, those who have already assumed power here, namely Donald Trump and his rum crew, or those who come to power in France come April and May, how are they going to respond to this? For this reason, I find Emmanuel Macron very refreshing. I realize that there's so much that is elusive or undefined about his candidacy. But one thing that does strike me and seems quite clear is his optimism and his refusal to have recourse to the rhetoric that is being employed by others on the French right.
Others on the French right. I want to pick up on what you're saying here about the great man theory. A recent Ipsos Mori poll showed the French have a particular penchant for a strong leader. To the question, do we need a strong leader willing to break the rules? 80% of the French said yes. Italy was third highest behind Israel. At the other end of the scale, only 21% of Germans agreed, last on the list behind Sweden and Spain. Laura Slimani, what does this tell you, that 80% of the French would be fine with a leader who from time to time bends or breaks the rules?
Well, I mean, it's obviously, I think, a bit worrying from a democratic point of view, but quite explained, I guess, by both a historical perspective, which is indeed the place that certain people took in history, and the myth that was built around these men. And I think that the institutions that the French are in since the beginning of the Fifth Republic in '58, that are putting one man on a sort of on the spotlight, and that he concentrates a lot of the powers, a lot of the institutional powers, both makes people think that every election they're going to find the providential person, but also creates this huge disillusion each time, because you put so much hope into one person only, and then the
French institutions rely too much on the president.
I think that paradoxically, Benoit Hamon's way of putting this at a distance from him and saying that what we are doing it not for him, but as a group, let's say, which is also what Sanders tried to do, I think, in the US. I think this is working because it's also answering paradoxically this kind of huge disappointment that always comes with thinking that you're going to find the perfect person in the next president.
Elizabeth, you find yourself at both ends of the spectrum there.
Exactly.
With the French at the top and the Germans at the bottom.
Exactly. I think it has to do mainly with dissatisfaction. I think French people are very dissatisfied right now, and that's the reason why they are asking for some strong leader. In some other polls that I read is that France and Greece are the two countries in the European Union where the people are most unhappy about their own situation, which is a little bit strange because France is not doing so badly. I mean, economically, it's somewhere in the middle. So this dissatisfaction with the situation expresses itself for the need in something new, groundbreaking, some leader. I'm not suspecting the French to want to have dictatorship installed very soon. I would be more optimistic about that.
What's the conclusion you draw, Nicholas?
As many people have said, nothing is written yet, and even outcomes that we wouldn't necessarily hope for are possible. And to say that democracy is here today and it's going to be here forever, I think is kidding yourself.
All right. Well, on that somber note, we'll end it there. Nicholas Vinegar, I want to thank you. I want to thank Laura Slimani,
thank you.
Elizabeth Humbert Dorfmuller, and as well Robert Zaretsky for joining us from Houston, Texas. Stay with us. Media Watch is next. And we say hello to Emma James.
Hi there. Yes, I've been taking a look at reactions online and in the press in general to the French left primaries. And it has been described by some as the second slap in the face for Manuel Valls, including this cartoonist Alex, who says...
Yeah, because there was a far-right supporter, I think, who slapped him on the campaign trail.
Yes, exactly, in Brittany. It was all rather unfortunate.
Yeah.
That young man has now been arrested and charged. But as Alex points out here, Hamon, ahead of Valls, is... as he puts it, an aller-retour, basically...
Cartoonists picking up on the ears, I see.
It is very unfortunate, the ears on both of them. But yes, as you can see, he's sporting two very livid marks there on his cheeks, courtesy of those two slaps in the face. Looking elsewhere, Libération points out that the press really is talking about the clash of two lefts because these candidates are so different. They quote here Laurent Geoffrin, who wrote in Libération that the left has lost its soul. The duel is apparently taking place on a boat that's letting in water. Those are his words. They say that basically the left is irrelevant unless it is promising to change the world.
Hang on, because François Hollande was in a desert yesterday and Benoit Hamon staged his victory speech on a boat. Is that of any symbolic significance?
I don't think it was a sign. I don't think it was a sign.
I don't think it was letting in water either, so we're OK there. But Libération also points out, interestingly, because it's a left-leaning newspaper, that it actually did use the same headline for once, a very rare thing, as Le Figaro, which has the clash of the two lefts.
Conservative daily.
Exactly. So, as you can see, very, very unusual for those two to be sharing the same thoughts, but they are. And that may be a clash of two lefts, but for some, the differences really aren't that important. This is clearly somebody with a sense of humour on the right side of the political spectrum, saying voting Hamon is perhaps choosing defeat. Voting for Valls is choosing defeat and dishonour.
This is not on the right side of the political spectrum, huh? I mean, this is a very funny.
Satirist,
It's a sarcastic.
Yes, indeed.
Left-wing Twitter account.
And this Twitter user, Maximilian Hoffmann, who works for Deutsche Welle, says the conflict at the heart of French socialists now out in the open, and basically it boils down to dreams versus pragmatism. Dreams, Hamon is seen very much as an idealist, which is why a lot of people are choosing to compare him with Jeremy Corbyn, the leader of the Labour Party in the United Kingdom. First Corbyn, now Benoit Hamon in France, says The Telegraph. Where will socialism's great extinction strike next? Now, according to them, it's going to be Italy that's next up for a collapse of the left wing. And this writer, Harry de Quetteville, puts it all down to centrism being deemed to be the problem. And so basically the parties are jettisoning long-held beliefs and policies in order to, well, and also electability along the way, because Jeremy Corbyn, of course, is pretty much renowned, I think, now for being the least electable leader of the opposition in Europe. He is very, very unpopular, apart from among the rabid followers, in which he seems to engender a huge amount of support, and it's almost evangelical, if you will. Now, whether Hamon can secure that kind of support, we'll have to wait and see. Now, the Telegraph also states categorically that it is going to be a three-horse race. They say Le Pen, Fillon and Emmanuel Macron, who they describe as a young Blairite, Tony Blair, of course, the other former Labour leader, rubbing his hands with glee over the fate of the left. Unlike Valls, they say he appears to have escaped being tainted by association with the Hollande government, which, of course, has hit record lows in terms of popularity. Looking stateside, the New York Times is also reporting on this. With French socialists in crisis, Manuel Valls and Benoit Hamon head to the runoff. They say that the French presidential election is being watched as a barometer of how bad things are in Europe, basically, the state of disaffection, and was Brexit a one-off, or is this an indication of things to come? They say from Italy to Poland to Britain and beyond, voters are deserting centre-left parties as leftist politicians struggle to remain relevant. Now, interestingly, they quote a disgruntled metal worker who's described as a stalwart socialist voter. Then he has said, "You have Trump, who do you think I am going to vote for?"
All right, we'll leave it there for now. Many thanks for that, Emma James. I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for joining us here on France 24.